Does this mean that this man is white? No, but I never said that the ancient Egyptians of the freaking old kingdom, I'm going to say this in full camera, because that's the thing. It's not like they still man my argument. No, they straw man it. Did I ever say that the ancient Egyptians of the old kingdom were white? No, that would be stupid. I never said it. Were there white Egyptians? Yes. Now given, make period. Because they relocated people from Greece, all that area. And then, of course, as the Roman invade, then a higher percentage, they also create some settlements, apart from the ruling elite. But they created some settlements where Greeks relocated, and then the Romans relocate there. So yes, there is a certain amount of Egyptians, the people that could have been born in Egypt, but they were originally from, I don't know, Italia. We do have some surnames in Northern Africa that are Celtic in origin. So yes, some Egyptians could have been white at that time, but that would have been a minority in the population. The further back you go, the further likely it is that the population will be white, or European if you don't want to use the word white. Some may have been, because you could have had Carthaginians relocating there, and now we know the Carthaginians are of European origins from a DNA perspective. But when it comes to the bulk of the population, they were brown. And then some of them would have been black, and those percentages vary geographically and according to the time. This is what I said. I was right. Every single thing that I said now, demonstrated by DNA analysis. And this is not a little small research. No. This was praised by professors at Harvard. This is peer-reviewed stuff. And it says every single thing that I've been saying and receiving backlash and hatred for years, all correct. Boom. This is what the genome says. Once again, the guy had brown skin. Yes, that doesn't make him an African though, because he's connected to the Levant. So unless you think that the Middle Eastern people that are more on the dark olive complexion, unless you think that those are black Africans, then the guy was not from Africa. Well, he was, because he was born in Northern Africa. I mean, just the other day, I read someone in the comments that told me, someone was telling me, hey, I'm black, but when I was a child, my teacher, I told her that Egypt is in Africa, and she told me, no, it's in the Middle East. Well, your teacher is an idiot. Egypt is in Africa. Of course it's in Africa. But, so the guy was African in the sense that he was born in the African continent, but he was not African in the sense that he was a black African. Not this guy. This is not what the DNA says. And so that's a fact now. Like, unless you're telling me that this is some kind of, well, I don't even care what they're going to use to try and justify this. How about we continue reading? I'm having a great time. I don't know about you. But this is great, guys. This is great. Yeah, so we were saying remains age of period. They harbor signs of ancestry similar to that of Northern Africans, as well as people from the Middle East, researchers report today in Nature. We read, it's incredibly exciting and important, says David Reich, a population geneticist at Harvard Medical School in Boston, who was not involved in the study. We, open quotes, we always hoped we would get our first ancient DNA from mummies, close quotes. Numerous labs have tried to extract DNA from ancient Egyptians' remains. In 1985, evolutionary geneticists, can't read that, reported the first ancient DNA sequences from any human, several thousand DNA letters from a 2,400-year-old Egyptian mummy. But this is a lot older, so it's even more significant, because what this tells us is that there were population movement patterns already 5,000 years ago from the Levant, which checks out, absolutely checks out. Now, does this tell us about the freaking Paleolithic inhabitants of this area? No, it doesn't, but it does tell us about ancient Egypt. And at the end of the day, what population lived in North Africa in, at this point, 50,000 years ago, doesn't matter when you're talking about ancient Egypt, because there was no pharaonic ancient Egypt 50,000 years ago. So if that's the discussion we are having, then it's different. We can talk about that. But because these people, usually my opponents, talk about ancient Egypt, and this is ancient Egypt. This is the very beginnings, the dawn of ancient Egypt. And will you look at that? What were the chances that the one guy that we managed to do a genomic sequence, Levantine origin? Once again, I'll state it. The guy was not white. As far as I'm concerned, he can have dark brown skin. He can have black skin. It doesn't matter. He's not from Africa originally. He's from the Middle East. I mean, there are some Indians that are as dark as some black Africans. This is also to tell you how stupid it is to fixate on the words white and black when we talk about these things. But because they are the ones who fixate over it and weaponize the utilization of terms, they are the ones that say that the word Kemet, or Kumat, as it probably was vocalized, regardless, the word Kemet with a vowel of convention through Coptic, they are the ones that say Kemet means the land of the black, black meaning the people. But that's a modern way of using black that people didn't use back in the day. Even the Romans, it's not like they called black people black, they called them Ethiopians, meaning generally everyone of a phenotypic trait that would probably go from dark brown to jet black. But the Romans didn't call them black because that's a modern usage. But they do that. It's obviously the black soil opposed to the red soil of the desert. But no, they will say, no, it's the land of the blacks. It's not. It's stupid. You're reading it in a modern sense. And it's linguistic dishonesty. Because then when it's for them, then they'll tell you, well, white doesn't make sense because people didn't use it back then. Then why are you using black in the modern sense then? It's always a matter of intellectual dishonesty. But intellectually, dishonesty can only take you so far until genetic data is presented and it tells us, Levantine, what you going to say now? Good. All right, let's have a look at the study proper. I've already read the whole thing, by the way, but I would like to share it with you guys. You know, if you could clone an ancient Egyptian, because here is another thing, chances are you could get a black guy, because as I say, particularly if he's from Upper Egypt, you could get a black person who is Egyptian because originally from Kush, but then they moved in there and then their children were brought up in Egypt, so now they're Egyptians. I don't have a problem with that. But if you go statistically, you know what I think? I think that the chances are he will look a lot like a modern Egyptian. And I've heard channels, I don't want to name the channels, but I've heard channels say, oh, when modern Egyptians dress up like ancient Egyptians, they are cosplaying. Well, that's disrespectful, because I do believe there is a certain level of genetic continuity as it's demonstrated here. And so it's very likely that even though some modern Egyptians might have ties to Arabs, others absolutely, particularly through the Coptic element, have ties to ancient Egypt. It's their land. So no, when they dress up as ancient Egyptians, they're dressing up as their ancestors. Once again, if you're a black African and you too have an ancestor who was black and from Egypt, they did exist, that's fine. It's only when they're like 100% black nation, then you're wrong, and DNA just proved you wrong. Well, that area, again, unless you go into the African humid period, that area is not going to be, and that's something that some people that usually argue on my side get wrong, and I do have to say that, is that there was a climate period in Africa, and as I say, it's usually around 14,000 years ago, where the Sahara was green, full of jungles and forests and rivers. Can you imagine that? And the reason is, it has to do with the Earth's axial tilt. So it actually has to do, you will have to, maybe I'll have to invite a cosmologist to really look into this, into the details, but generically, it's because something happened with the axis of the Earth, some changes. And these changes completely affected the climate in that area. And if you look at some of the recreations, so how the Sahara region looked in this specific period, it's mind-blowing to imagine that, full of grass and trees and lakes. It would have been incredible. So yeah, when some people say Sahara was a barrier, I'm like, yeah, when? You need to ask when, because otherwise you may be creating a straw man that lacks academic validity when you say that. I've seen some 3D recreations and they look outstanding.